about PPTs today and what's happening in Connecticut and whether people are getting PPTs or not having PPTs. Keo, I know you've had a couple different stories. What are people generally being told that you're talking to?
So I've had two districts, two very different takes on it. One district is saying absolutely not, they won't hold PPTs during this time. And then I have another district that's actually pushing for PPTs. They've actually held PPTs. In both cases, parents weren't necessarily prepared for them, but one did go ahead and have her PPT, and then the other one was able then to get it pushed back until school resumes.
And what did she do to make that happen? The one who didn't want to have her PPT right now.
So I ended up getting involved to support her. So I wrote a letter on her behalf, and I also included the memo from Brian that was put out on March 24th, and it talked about, because this would have been an annual PPT. And I only did that because the teacher, when she wrote to the mom, she said that legally they had to have the PPT right now. Mom has two kids on the spectrum, one with very significant needs, and it just was not going to be feasible. She's the only caretaker, and she's having to manage both girls. And like I said, one has a lot of needs, and she wouldn't have been able to meaningfully participate at the PPT over the phone or even virtually.
So your letter helped them to understand that this was not feasible for her to participate.
Yes, and in all fairness, mom did explain her situation in writing and said that she's, having to manage her daughter, and her daughter gets really aggressive and she has a lot of behavior challenges. She's also nonverbal. She's on a diaper. She's 15, and the teacher's saying we still legally have to have this PPT. So it was really pushing mom to feel like she didn't have an option, and that's when she reached out and said, I just can't do this right now. And after I sent the letter, she wrote back to mom and said, I'm sorry, I understand. And now they're just going to wait for when school starts. For the other mom, only because she doesn't have a son with very high needs, I had already encouraged her, if it wasn't going to really change much, her son has ADHD, not that he doesn't have needs. However, I do understand that if we all wait till school resumes, then there's going to be less opportunities for instruction, because then teachers are all going to be caught up at PPTs. So I want to be mindful for those families that are comfortable, if they're able to go through it, and then if they have questions, they could always go back and have a program review.
Right. So I felt that the guidance was clear, but maybe because I had a conversation with Brian to understand it. But what I get from that is that they're not saying you must have one or you can't have one. They're saying be thoughtful about when you need to have one and make sure you do need to have one. Because if you're meeting for compliance purposes to meet a timeline, not because it's helping a student with their needs, then they're asking that we go through that parents and schools go through that protocol. It's probably the wrong word. They gave us some things to consider when wondering whether you need to have a PPT. And it's really determining whether there's a real need right now in order to be able to meet that child's needs, and not to do it just because there's a date on a calendar that says you need to meet. And the guidance is really clear that from the state of Connecticut's point of view, they do not believe you need to have a PPT to document how they're doing distance learning or learning at home, educational opportunities, whatever we call them, that since everybody got relocated to home, there's no need to have a PPT to do a change in placement. But there are going to be situations like you described where a family needs to have a PPT. And as far as I read the guidance, and it sounds like you too, there's room for that. Mm-hmm. And so what would you do if you had a family that didn't want to go to PPT? What if you had a family who really felt there was a need to go to PPT? How would you encourage them to move forward to get that PPT?
So I think the first thing I would make sure is, one, that the technology that's going to be used is a platform that the parent has already been exposed to. So I would have them do a dry run with the family. And I say that only because one of the parents that ended up going through the PPT, come to find out the day of, the platform wasn't even loaded into her computer. Then it took them about 10 minutes to realize that it was not going to work on her computer. Then they were using her son's Chromebook and they would not download. So they had to postpone it for 2 days until they figure out a different platform. So that's already starting off in a challenging situation because the parent already has fears about doing the PPT virtually. It's a new experience for her. In addition to that, translation. So they really didn't coordinate how translation was going to be offered. And I wish they would have prepared her to say that she could be in contact privately through the chat box with the translator so that if she had questions, she could ask her questions. Or even if it was through the group, but that someone in particular was just going to be paying attention to that chat box and develop a way that they could communicate in the event that she had her own questions. So I know it's a
tip for people who need a translator to use the chat box. But what I was talking about, Kia, was what if a family thinks that they have a need to have a PPT for whatever reason, they have a change that they need to make, and the district is one of the districts saying, we're not doing PPTs. What would you do with that parent?
So then I would encourage them to reach out to this special ed teacher just to see, because if the concern is about what's happening at home, then they can make some adjustments to that. So it wouldn't necessarily change the IEP, but they could modify the work that's being sent home, or they could modify how the work's going to be produced. So the mom that I mentioned about the two girls, she adamantly is not able to do technology. One, because she didn't have a Chromebook or a tablet or even an iPad. Two, she didn't have internet service. Three, there was a language barrier for the parent. Four, there were limitations for her daughter. So she was able to get her work done through a packet. So I feel like those, because if they're really not, so I guess the thing I want parents to get is that all kids are getting some form of some educational opportunity. What that looks like for their child could be different based on their individual needs. Even if it was a regular ed student, right? If they're not able to do the work online, then I'm sure they're able to reach out to the teacher to say, what other way can I produce work and show you what I'm doing? And I don't want families to feel like it has to be done only on one platform. You know, virtual learning is not for everyone.
Okay, so your first step is maybe you don't need a PPT if you need change. Talk to the people that are implementing the opportunities. So I have a situation with a family that just moved to Connecticut. So they're now in Connecticut and they've never registered in their school district and they have a kid with an IEP. So they don't have a program in Connecticut. They need to, I think they need to have a PPT because that team doesn't know this kid at all. So, you know, certainly I think at the very least there needs to be a meeting. I don't know why if there's a meeting, you wouldn't make it a PPT because you want people to learn who this child is, to get a copy of the IEP and to figure out how they're going to service that child now that they live in Connecticut. So if they call the district director and they are told we're not doing PPTs, where would you send them next?
I think I would have them still have a conversation about the IEP that was in place and to see what it was, looking at the goals, the accommodations, modifications page, what it was that was being provided and try to see how much they could mirror that. Granted, it's going to look different. Everyone's learning is going to look different because now it's not in a academic setting. But I'm sure there's bits and pieces of that IEP that they could incorporate into their day-to-day, whether it's daily life skills, social emotional learning. You know, there's the what are they doing? OT online. Some are doing videos. Some are sending like little check off lists for parents to kind of try these different things, and then they'll report back in a couple of days if it's working, if it's not working. So I feel like there's parts of the IEP that they could work on.
Right, but outside of a PPT meeting, you're saying?
Outside of a PPT. I mean, it's, I guess because we can't push a district to have a PPT and there's no legal mandate that says you have to have the PPT. Right now, I want just parents to be able to try to understand where we're at right now. This is kind of uncharted waters. So having the PPT right now, even if they change the IEP, it's not going to be able to get implemented necessarily. But at least there's ways of getting support in the home, whether it's phone calls, video calls, packets that can be sent to the home or the parent can pick up So there's other ways to extend the learning. And then it'll give them a chance to the parents and the school to collect data. We've given you XYZ work. We're able to monitor it online, or we're able to receive what you're doing. And then we could kind of see where the child is at. And then when they go back to PPT, it'll give them a chance to kind of see what has happened.
I think that if the district is working with the family without a PPT, as long as they're doing what you're saying and they're working together to meet the child's needs, that I would agree. I think that we have some families that are just hitting a brick wall where they're not getting any, they're just being told, we're not doing PPTs, we're not doing anything right now except for, you know, what's happening every day with their teachers. So at the State Department, there are 2 dedicated bureau people that are doing parent calls. And I would say if a parent feels that they're not getting, like you're describing somebody who's responsive, who's helpful, and that's great. And that's really, you know, that's really all parents need right now is somebody to help them support their child's learning in a way that works for the family. But if they're not getting that, I would encourage people to call the bureau. Jay Brown and Jim Moriarty are the 2 that are taking the parent calls. And so far, I mean, you've called for one parent and you found that they were pretty responsive, right?
They were.
Yeah.
I will also say I have another parent, a dad, and he's having difficulty because his particular district is providing online learning, and his son has not been able to be successful with online learning. And dad is asking for an alternative mode. And the teacher continues to insist that he's able to do the work online, even though dad is not seeing that. So dad is asking for a PPT. And in this case, the teacher said, nope, we already had a PPT. He already had the annual. We don't need to do another PPT. This is work that we know he can do. So now I'm trying to support him where now I want to reach out to the teacher and say, hey, can we look at other options? Because if dad is reporting this, let's take that into consideration, because then the student's not producing any meaningful work. He's not doing any work. So they're not able to collect any data.
You and I talked the other day about something that happened to me. You remember the story where I was telling the story that when my son was younger, he was sent home with some work that I thought was way over his head. And I said he couldn't do it. And we sat down and we spent an hour and we pulled teeth and it was a battle. And we finally finished and we sent it in. And I wrote a note and said, this is way over his head. He cannot do this. Next day, the same work came home and I had him do it independently without my help at all to show that he could not do this work. When that sheet got to the school, I got a call immediately and said, what was this? You know, what is this? I said, that's him working independently. That's how I told you he couldn't do this work. And they said, well, did you have him transfer that to the whiteboard? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. They said, we take one problem, this was multiplication of fractions, and we transfer it to a whiteboard where he can see it better. It's not such a busy page, and he can solve it, and then he can transfer the answer back to the main page. Well, what do you know, 10 minutes, 10 problems, 100% all by himself with the whiteboard. So one of the things I would say in those conversations when this dad is saying he can't do it, he needs to be descriptive. What is the barrier to that child's ability? Because I showed him when Jacob did not have that whiteboard, he wrote numbers all up and down the sides of the page and all around, and he couldn't line up his 10s and 1s because of his OT issues. With that whiteboard, he did not have any issue. So if that teacher is insisting he can learn online and the parent is saying he can't, they need to meet somewhere in the middle and say, well, what's the barrier? What if you say he can do it in school, what are you doing differently than I'm doing at home? Because this is what I'm doing at home and it's not working. Because sometimes through my story, we're not right. I think most of the time we know that what our kids can and cannot do, but I was surprised to learn he could do the skill with the right accommodation. And I'm not sure that everybody, the teachers know what accommodations they use with the kid, but they may not be thinking every little detail. And I forgive them of that because they've got a bunch of kids to think about every little detail. So when the parent and that teacher have that conversation to say, what is the barrier? Maybe they'll be able to uncover something that the dad doesn't know to do because nobody told him to do it, that will actually help the child be more successful. So I would encourage deeper conversation there, because when you get that, he can, he can't, he can, he can't, there's no resolution there. We got to say, well, what does it look like when he can't? Or from dad's perspective, what does it look like when he can? What is he doing? Because we also know some kids play their parents, and so that's a different issue. But, I'm assuming that that's not the case.
I know for dad, there's also a language barrier. This is also a Spanish speaking family. So I don't know if he hasn't been able yet to say to me that part of the challenge is also that I can't help him, right? Because I'm not able to understand the instructions. It's all foreign to him. What dad insists on saying is he cannot do the work. They assign the work and he can't do it. And my son is frustrated, and he's trying and he can't do it. So I'm hoping that today we get more conversation and have a chance to really dig deeper and kind of see, is it all of it? Is it the writing? Is it the reading? Is it the math?
It depends on the kid. Tammy, do you want to share? Do you want me to? I don't know if I have to unmute you, if you can unmute yourself, but do you want to share the story?
I did unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So I did have an assignment this weekend, and I kind of did the same thing. I let it go through as to the best of his ability. And I knew he gave up at question number 6 and he didn't complete the assignment. And we did get an email back saying if the assignment was returned, it wasn't completed. And then I took a screenshot of the instructions and I sent the email back to the teacher and said, look, he tried. And when he got to question 6, these weren't instructions that were clear, descriptive, short. With my son's disability, he needs specific instructions and broken out so that you don't have 4 questions in one bullet, because to him that he just gets cognitively overwhelmed at that point and he shuts down. And I got a really, really nice response from the teacher telling me he's doing a great job. I saw a huge improvement for the whole class. The instructions now are very bulleted, they're short. The action verbs were all in all caps, so he knew what he had to do for every step. So, from my standpoint, everybody's learning. This is a challenge for everyone. But I was so happy that the next assignment that I got, she incorporated my suggestions and he was able to do it independently.
And that's universal design for everybody in the classroom. They all got the benefit of of really clear, concise directions. Yep. So that's awesome. That's really, really good. And I do feel that people just, it's so new, as you said, everybody's learning, the teachers are learning. I think we have to be patient. And I think most families are, and most families are moving along and things are moving along with districts. But we are hearing from families that have nothing. And if the family doesn't have any technology and the school's only doing technology, there are it's an opportunity for a lot of things to go wrong as well. So we all do have to try to be understanding and respectful of the efforts that people are making. But in the case, if you happen to be a person in a case where the effort doesn't feel right, or you don't feel that it's quite in the spirit of what we're trying to do here, where every kid gets something to meet their needs, then people do need to reach out to the state so that they hear it. When I spoke to Brian Klimkowitz this morning, he said, I'm really only hearing from CPAC as far as, and maybe other parent organizations. The parents have not started using the consultants that much yet. So if everybody that listens to this knows somebody that's struggling, let them know that there are folks up at the Bureau that will help them with their district. And through Keo's experience, it was a very positive help. And they contacted the district and tried to work things out. So we hope that people will try to go through the chain of command, ask the teacher, ask anybody in the district that they think can help before they need to go to the state. But the state is there if you reach a roadblock.
And I think for that one particular district, it was because of compliance that they were pushing the PPT, because it was an annual and they were really trying to meet the deadline. So I really want families to know that even though that deadline does exist during this time, there is some wiggle room in the sense that it could be pushed back because of the circumstance, and not to get stuck trying to meet this timeline when in reality, so much has changed. So even if they are going to PPT, it's not like the IEP is going to get implemented anyway right away. And it may not change anything right now. However, I also want to be mindful that if we're able to collaborate with the district and there is a possibility that you're comfortable going to PPT, it's actually not a bad thing either, right? Because it's a chance to kind of let the district know right now, hey, I just started to notice this. I didn't see this before. Are we looking at this? Are we going to plan for this? Because now there's probably things that are bubbling up that parents didn't notice. So maybe you want to have the conversation and you want to plan for when school resumes based on your current observations. So there's a win to that too. And I want families to know that it's really what works for them and not necessarily what was, before. We had this timeline, we had to meet the timeline. Right now, there's some wiggle room that if you need extra time to collect data, you can. And also, if you've been collecting data, let's share it, because now maybe they're like, oh, we didn't know that this was a thing. And they can now start giving you some, and you'll have the whole team there. So everyone is right there and you're able to ask questions because now you're at home trying to implement an IEP to some degree, and they can help you with accommodations and modifications. I know for one of my kids, Julian in particular, he has to read these articles through Newsella. And after he reads these articles, it asks like 10 questions. In addition to that, the teacher has a writing component, and she created this this word sheet, and he has to answer these questions. And he's LD. So from him having to read the article, to answer the questions, to go back to the Word document, to then have to go back into the article to figure out where these answers are, is so complex. So as I was talking to the special ed teacher, I'm like, it's so hard for him. And then I literally, as I'm talking to her, like a little bubble went in my head, and it said, why am I not printing out this sheet so that he can have it there and write it in? And then she says, have you tried him writing? I said, yes, but I have him rewrite all the questions. So I'm adding to his work, and we keep having resistance. And all I had to do was just print the sheet. And
not everybody can do that, but that was a simple solution for you guys.
Yes. And you mentioned CAM. I've never heard of that, Tammy.
You mentioned, what was it, Q?
So Tammy put in the chat box that he could use CAM, KAM, and that she can put the questions next to the article and he can do TTS for answers. Can you explain that a little bit?
So we also struggle with the back and forth between things, and I've even found it to be really difficult for like a research paper or something. But Cami actually, it will pull up your PDF file, and the teacher could put like little sticky notes in there of what her questions are, and the student can highlight and answer the question. So everything is on one screen in one place. And right now they are offering free trials, and it's you could just Google Cami and see it. There's some quick little videos. I watched them over the weekend, and that's how I started using it. And it lets you it helps you communicate back and forth with a PDF file or with a Newsleah article, that you don't have to flip between the screens.
Okay, thank you for sharing, because I know that's been a real challenge.
It's been a big challenge.
I'm just thinking that when we talk about topics to talk about on our Tuesday and Thursday morning, assistive technology seems like a really important one.
Yes.
I can't say that I'm an expert on that. Maybe we need to find somebody, and Tammy, you're kind of close to that, that would be willing to come and talk about different ways to accommodate the children that are struggling with online learning, that this is a new way for them. And there is software out there to help them. There are apps that can help them. We will have to work on getting an AT person who can really kind of troubleshoot some of these problems. That's a great piece of information for us.
It is, only because I guess we're all learning. So I know for teachers, they're also trying to figure out how they can support their kids. And my kids go to a Montessori charter school. So they really didn't use technology in the way that now they're using technology. So I know the teachers are also learning the platforms. And my kids are not used to getting homework. It's part of the Montessori model. So we're also having to adjust that all this work is now being done at home. So trying to find balance between using technology and having to do homework or work in the home that was not part of our routine
Yeah,
or their routine.
I noticed that I shared at a staff meeting an app that I use on my phone called Cam Scanner, because parents were having trouble if they didn't have a printer. Some people were handing work in hard copy, that you can take a picture with the Cam Scanner on your phone, which is a free app, and send it to the teacher via email if you do have email. So that's another piece of technology that's free and easy to use. And our staff all called me afterwards and said, "What was the name of that again?"
Yes.
You know, sending things to people via email now, when you don't have a copy machine, you know, and you're working from home, that's a nice little piece of software. Well, I like the idea to bring somebody on for AT. Next Tuesday, we have a BCBA who will be joining us. And the following Thursday, which is the 16th, we're going to talk about transition and documenting your child's performance right now, because a lot of seniors that are supposed to be graduating or kids aging out are really on the edge with this timeline. If this is your last year in school, what is that going to mean to you? So we have some folks coming to talk about documenting where your child is now for when they come back to school.
Oh,
And
that's fantastic.
yeah, Laura and Lynn are going to do that next Thursday.
Okay.
So I hope people will join. I hope people will come and watch the recordings, and maybe more as we go along, we'll get some more folks to join us on the call. And Tammy, I really appreciate your participation.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And if you can, you know, send us any messages about topics that would be of interest to you or topics that you'd like to contribute to, we'd welcome that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I did just send you a link. Yale did a very, very good page about accessibility in Zoom meetings, and I sent you the link to that, so feel free to check it out.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. We'll see you on Thursday.
Have a
Bye.
great day.
Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Thank you.